Hello there, welcome to Breaking on the Daily. I'm Kel Kidman, and today we begin with the Federal Reserve Chairman, Jerome Powell, saying the economy as we knew might be over because these communists and Marxists and all of those types need to make it just that much more clear exactly what they want. They want a reset of the economy, and in this case, he's saying the government needs to get more involved with, the central planning of the economy, essentially quintessential socialism, or at least the foundations of the argument for it. And man, oh man, does this just keep getting worse. COVID has gone to ridiculous heights, and it seems as though the economy, particularly if we let it, will be irreparably changed if we allow it to be. That is where we're going with the COVID stuff. And interestingly, something from Elon Musk, this is a New York Post story. Elon Musk says he took 4 rapid COVID-19 tests with split results. Elon Musk on Thursday night said he took 4 rapid COVID tests with 2 negative results and 2 positive results. Now, this is interesting because it means that the test is potentially inaccurate, and he's saying the test is essentially bogus, and that it needs to be looked into, and that he actually is looking into it personally, and he may have it, to be clear. And he says he's going to be taking a different type of test to see if that becomes a more consistent, version of the test. But this is kind of interesting. I mean, it doesn't necessarily imply anything on its own, but it's an interesting story nonetheless. And considering Elon Musk's recent libertarian streak, it's going to be interesting to see where he goes with this. But in terms of a more important story, and one which I think should worry us all, Fauci, U.S. has independent spirit, but it's time to do what you're told. Fauci is someone I don't like. Is someone who I think is the quintessential bureaucrat, someone who claims to not be political. Within this exact statement, he says he dismisses the notion that scientists are authoritarian, and he says it's unfortunate that science has become lumped into politics. The problem with this assertion is that, of course, he doesn't understand what the word politics means. Of course, most people don't. For those who don't know, the origin of the word politics is the Greek or Roman word, I think it is Roman, actually, the Roman word polis. Polis means the public square, that sort of thing. It is actually a reference to a particular place. And politics is essentially to mean the matters of the public, the matters of the society. And so, I think it would be fairly hard to argue that a public health expert is not a political figure, at least in the traditional sense. But we have not used this definition of politics for a very long time. We've rather used politics to refer to specifically party politics. The idea of, I have my political positions, you have your political positions, and then we have this sort of scientific politics in the background, the scientific running of the government. All matters of the government, however, are politics, and are thus fair game to be talked about within the realm of politics, particularly when you are a public health expert. And I take umbrage with the idea that people call scientists authoritarian. I don't call scientists authoritarian. It's too broad a statement. There are many, many scientists who are not authoritarian. Fauci is not one of them. He is clearly an authoritarian, a technocrat, that sort of thing. He believes that he should be in control of all of your life. It's clear from this statement. It's clear from the form through which he speaks that he does not respect your individual rights, he doesn't respect your freedom, he doesn't respect anything of that sort. And you shouldn't respect him either. The very notion that we should just do what we're told is very anti-American in its own right. And Fauci is no stranger to this sort of comment. He's been making these sort of comments for months at this point. I remember back, and I think it was July, that he said that Americans question authority too much. Really. It seems to me that Americans don't question authority enough if they really trust Fauci more than any other politician. As I've already stated before, I believe that Fauci and other people like him are worse than politicians, because politicians are subject to us. They are at our whims. Their jobs are controlled by the public, by the voting bloc, by the people. However, the bureaucrat, the type that Fauci is, panders only to the politicians, and it's clear, I think it's ever more clear, that he's only interested in his own skin. He's only interested in his own job. All of what he's said over the past week has been an attempt to see if he can get a spot in the Biden administration. That's all that he's been doing over the past few weeks. And it's worrying. Justice Alito, just recently, has warned of the dangers to free speech, religious liberty, in a Federalist Society address. And I concur entirely with his assessment of our current state. We have focused ourselves so much on social permissiveness, on the idea that no particular social behavior is better or worse than another, that we have fell into a different sort of authoritarianism. People forget that not only theocracy can be authoritarian, but you can also have authoritarian of atheism. You can have authoritarianism of any sort of moral system, because the fundamental nature of libertarianism is not your particular moral standard, but rather, as I have stated before in the past, rather it is the idea that we should not apply our largest or highest moral standards to the entirety of the public, that we should rather focus on our lowest moral standard, that being consent. But to discard our moral standards does nothing to help us. And those who would advocate for social permissiveness without advocating as well for a specific measure of libertarianism in that respect, rather than making the libertarian argument for it, simply that it is not the government's place to decide all of these things, and it is their freedom to actually choose their moral guidance in large respect, which is the fundamental libertarian argument, but rather say, it's fine, it's good, and don't make the fundamental philosophical point of they have the freedom to do it. If they don't make that argument, if rather they're trying to make the argument, no, it's good, be wary. I'm not saying that necessarily they are all authoritarians. No, on the contrary. In fact, most of them are likely simply ignorant, simply unable to properly formulate their own positions. But be wary, rather, than the ilk, the rabble. Be wary of the thought leaders who would speak in such words. Be wary of them, because they're the ones who truly are authoritarian. They're the ones who truly are communists in that respect. Watch out for them. But on to more stories. Let's get a bit more peppy. Because we have election news. More election news. As there is every day, the presidential election never stops. In Georgia, to begin with, we have the largest hand retally of ballots in U.S. history. In Georgia, they're doing an audit and a full recount of all of the, I think it's a full recount of all of the ballots. And that's going to be fun. Now, this isn't going to flip thousands of ballots. Well, it may. It may flip thousands of ballots, but it's kind of a Hail Mary. And so, I don't think that's what we should focus on. So let's go on to our next story. The Arizona GOP files lawsuit asking for hand recount of votes by precinct. We're doing another recount story. They're asking, whereas before they did a Arizona has already done a recount on per county. The Republican GOP, the GOP, is asking for a recount based on the precinct, which they say is more accurate, and I think this will go through. However, it probably won't flip the state either. So, where do you think my hope for President Trump, in terms of him winning the presidency, comes from? Well, it isn't from any of these states. No, instead I think it comes from Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania lawsuit. It's where everything is actually happening. But it isn't something that you'll see on most news outlets. The only news outlet that is properly covering the presidential election at all, in fact, is the Epoch Times, which is why all of these stories have been from the Epoch Times. Now, it's not necessarily because they're pro-Trump, because, frankly, I don't think they are. At least not particularly, other than in the fact that they don't outright dismiss him right at the beginning of all of their articles and throughout. If you go to most any news outlet, rather, you'll see talks and lots of talk about voter fraud. Lots and lots of talk about people voting illegally, whether it be through voting twice or lots of printed ballots or that sort of thing. That's where they think the Trump team is trying to make their hay. However, that's not where the Trump team is trying to make their hay. If you saw yesterday, the Trump team got a very important, though on paper very small, legal victory in Pennsylvania yesterday. There was a court case that was decided in the Trump team's favor that disallowed the counting of ballots that were set aside after the election. This is an important first step, because this is not the only suit in Pennsylvania with regard to a specific form of election impropriety, that being process, which is where the Trump administration strategy has been this entire time and where it is going. Because their second lawsuit, and their more important lawsuit, one which could affect as many as 2.7 million ballots in Pennsylvania alone, not to mention all the states it would later be applied to, and thus affect potentially tens of millions of ballots. They're alleging process crimes. They're alleging that the process for mail-in ballots specifically was illegitimate, that the mail-in ballots were allowed to be cured in violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. And you can tell it's spooking the Democrats. In a story just from yesterday, Pennsylvania officials, DNC, ask federal judge to dismiss Trump lawsuit. You can read in this motion for dismissal how worried they are about this lawsuit, because they make very interesting arguments. They argue that it's not a federal jurisdiction, and I think a lot of their arguments are fairly not very good. I mean, they say that the assertions are vague, that the assertions of fact and that sort of thing are too vague to have any standing. I disagree. I've read the much of the deposition from the actual Trump court case in this instance, and it's fairly strong, and I think it will go through. I really do. And I have a sneaking suspicion this case in particular will go to the Supreme Court and may affect the entirety of mail-in ballots across the country. And if it does, there's a distinct possibility that all mail-in ballots will be invalidated, because the argument that's being made in this lawsuit is that mail-in ballots are inherently different from in-person ballots and put in-person ballots at a disadvantage and are thus devalued. It violates the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment and would thus be disallowed by it. It is unconstitutional, and makes the argument that the federal court has jurisdiction because, well, it makes the argument that certain federal statutes make it so that the federal government has certain jurisdiction over state rules, and specifically over state rules which are unequal for different sets of people. Because there are lots of interesting things asserted here. You have things like, in specific counties, you were allowed to cure your mail-in ballot if you put it in incorrectly. However, in other counties, you weren't. This is a powerful argument. And if it gets through, and I think it will, it will affect hundreds of thousands of ballots that got cured, which will then be invalidated. That's enough to swing an election. If they get this through in federal court, which is actually really important, they can just say, well, I'm going to do the exact same lawsuit, except I'm going to do it in Georgia, except I'm going to do it in Michigan, except I'm going to do it in Arizona. I'm going to do it in all these states that I'm already contesting. We're going to do that. And that will affect hundreds of thousands of ballots, millions of ballots. That's where this is going. Keep an eye on this Pennsylvania lawsuit, because where this goes, I'm telling you right now, wherever this lawsuit specifically goes, will be where the election goes. If Trump wins this lawsuit, he will win. If he loses this lawsuit, he will lose. It is that simple. But none of the media is talking about it. You won't see many updates on this outside of the Epoch Times. It's on the front page of just their website. You don't see this on the New York Post, on Daily Mail, on CNN, on MSNBC, on NBC, on Fox, not anywhere. The legacy media has completely blanked out on this story because they don't realize, or not that they don't realize, but they don't want you to realize where this election is right now. It is in Pennsylvania. It is in this lawsuit. If he wins, he'll win, and the media will inevitably claim that it was stolen. If he loses, he loses. It's that simple. So watch this lawsuit. That's where I'm going to leave you today. This has been Breaking on the Daily. Subscribe for more. I'm Kel Kidman, and I'm out.